And the guest is Dr. Revis Mitchell, professor from Fisk University. And of course, Dr. Mitchell, before we had our first commercial break, we were talking about some aspects of the institution of slavery.
Yes.
But let's sort of move beyond that and have you to talk about what historians generally talk about when they talk about what? The coming of the Civil War, which is to say that you've already given us the background and the basis for some conflict between these two sections of the country.
The two sections. And it's a vast difference, one industrial, one agricultural, and both trying to maintain a balance. The South understood that you were only going to have slavery in areas where you needed slavery, where you needed mass labor. And as the country begins to expand in the 1830s and 40s and 50s, as we look to the West, there's not much possibility of the use of slaves. So there's going to be that loss of balance. Also important to that was the question of tariffs and taxes. The North wanted a protective tariff. They wanted to keep foreign products from coming in, so they wanted high tax or tariff on them. The South needed to sell that cotton in Europe. They wanted very low taxes. So the question of the taxes will be decided by the number of slave and free states. So we see politically in America several activities, congressional activities at the congressional level, trying to keep this imaginary balance. The very famous Missouri Compromise, where Missouri's cut half in two, trying to make this balance of slave and free states. The questions about the West. But eventually, Southern leaders come to realize that they really are in a desperate struggle. That balance is not going to be maintained. Additionally, with the economic base of the country, as far as banking and insurance, is in the Northeast. And the South becomes heavily indebted during several bad years. When the cotton crops failed, they had borrowed money from the North. They had purchased insurance from the North. It reached a point of diminishing returns for the South. They really had their back up against the wall. John C. Calhoun of South Carolina, one-time Vice President of the United States, Calhoun comes up with this doctrine of succession, that if you can join the Union, you can leave the Union. Calhoun bases much of this on the North's objectionability of the South's way of life and of agriculture. We should understand that by the 1860s, they really developed among especially politicians strong dislike because they couldn't compromise. One of the words we hear so often today, it was partisan politics at its very worst. At its very worst. People despising people because of their region and because of their politics. Caught in the middle of this is the slave. Eventually it reaches a point where the South will succeed. They will leave the Union. The North, Abraham Lincoln, an important figure. Lincoln truly cherished the Union. He cherished this form of government. You know, we really have a new, unique form of government here. And at that point in time, there was nowhere else in the world like the United States of America. When Lincoln wrote those words about that government of the people, by the people, and for the people, he was really serious on this matter. Lincoln had stated that a house divided against itself cannot stand, regarding the Union. People usually don't carry that statement to its conclusion. He said either the Union must become all slave or all free. But Lincoln should be remembered as one who would give the last full measure to preserve the Union.
Very good.
He could not accept Calhoun and other Southerners talking about dividing the Union. He could not understand that there would be states out of this Union. He was constantly in favor of expanding the form of government to the new Western regions. To have the South challenge him on this, Lincoln would meet the test. Outgoing President James Buchanan, prior to Lincoln's inauguration, had faced a problem at Fort Sumter. Union forces were inside of Fort Sumter. Southern forces had surrounded Fort Sumter. At this point, Lincoln says he wants it to be known that he was not carrying out a war effort against the South, but he would resupply those troops. Lincoln will send in resupplies. The Southern forces will fire on U.S. vessels, eventually bringing down the flag. That struck an emotional note at that time. So much partisan in the country. Anyone would fire on the flag, much like today firing on the flag, but this is a family struggle, North and South, brother against brother, cousin against cousin. Some historians point out that Lincoln had actually allowed word to go out when those supplies would be traveling. He had tricked the South into firing the first shot. But whatever the case, there's a response. Throughout the North, men rush to the call. They rush to the call to save the Union. Implicit in that South, of course, is the institution of slavery. One point that today is making more and more relevance, you can't talk about Southerners and slaves. You must understand that the slaves were Southerners. They were just as caught up in the melee and the discussion as everyone else in the South. Of course, if the better your condition, the more you're involved in this. If you're constantly being exploited for your labor, you have a problem with that, but you don't know of any other system. Unfortunately for Lincoln, after the first 90 days, the war goes rather bad for the North. Victories are slow in coming. The South fights with a lot of emotion. They fight a war to save their homeland because that's where most of it's being fought. Of course, the greatest number of Civil War battles were fought here in Tennessee.
Invasion.
Invasion, that's right. Moving north and south. But it reached a point where those bodies begin to come back north. The Union Army is being defeated by a Southern Army that really tactically has wonderful leaders. The military genius of the country at that time were those Southerners, second and third sons of planters who were sent to military schools, men like Robert E. Lee, men like Stonewall Jackson, men like Nathan Bedford Forrest. They were excellent military men, generals. Lincoln had never imagined that the war would go 2 or 3 years. He thought in 90 days the South would be crushed. Lincoln finally faces a manpower question. And eventually he turns to those who had been enslaved. But he must free them first through emancipation.
And so when we come back, we've got about 50 seconds, Dr. Mitchell, before the second break. And when we come back, we'll talk about the issuance of that proclamation. I think it's safe to say now that, as you indicated, that it was sort of a carrot stick kind of thing with Abraham Lincoln, and the dates that he issued it was I think it was September of 1862 that he issued it.
After the Battle of Antietam.
Saying in essence that I'm going to give you 3 months. January 1st, I'm going to give you 3 months to make a decision as to whether you're coming back into this union. And of course, if not in 3 months, then I'm going to do the unthinkable, which is to say put arms in the hands of your slaves, you see. And of course, that was something that both the North and South dreaded, whites in the North and South dreaded. And of course, we'll be back following this short commercial break. And we're talking to Dr. Revis